Hey guys, Jalen doing the last and final part of the episode 10 special on Dungeon World. Of course, you saw part 1 being Pure Adventures. Then we see Glory's part 2, Pure Enemies. And now you get to see the most prominent and probably most depressing part 3 with Dungeon Mix. Dungeon Mix is just a shorter version, an easier way of saying this is a mix between Dungeon Enemies and Dungeon Adventures in one whole deck, and it's got a few support cards that make this deck pretty great. Now, I'm not very fond of this deck. I don't have a hate for it. It just is not a very interesting deck to go over because it's what we would call the meta, what is very prominent in the format. So I'm not really fond of talking about meta decks because they're not really special. They're just where you're going to see often and what could annoy you and what's pretty broken or something like that. So that's what my problem with the deck is. So for part 3, I'm trying to make this a little bit quicker. So I'm going to go over every pro in the deck first, and then I'll proceed to all the cons in the deck. Spoiler alert, there's going to be a classic amount of more pros than cons. Of course, the best deck of the format right now. So, without further ado, let's get on to Dungeon Enemy and Dungeon Adventure mixed deck, pros and cons. For the first pro, we have OTKs. What else can there be said? This deck has plenty of it. You have lots of different ways to do it, such as your impacts, your monsters, with your weapons, and other things. Oh, there's so many different plays, but I'm going to explain them later after I go over all the pros. Another pro of the deck is the great damage output. It's almost godly, but I don't want to say all that. But with a deck that can OTK, you would assume that its damage output is something rather high. This deck can go for lots of damage in a turn, and it does not cost them much. And as you may know, this is mixed with Dungeon Adventures, so they have potential to search the cards out. Speaking of searching cards out, the next pro of the deck is mission cards. Mission cards are, of course, like I said in Pure Adventure video, we have, of course, for a party that allows you to add any adventure by activating another mission card. Defeat all monsters when you destroy stuff with adventures, which isn't as prominent in this deck because you do have Dungeon Enemies in there. But now that you're able to you can still play this card well, you destroy with your adventures and you pretty much get a fancy nice one. And then we got Hot Springs, which gets you back all your adventure resources from the drop. And now let's get on to the next pro, which is the Monster Revival. Now, this isn't full of Demon Lord's Dungeon because, well, you need a Demon Lord attribute, and they don't play any Demon Lords to get this off. So what do they play? They play Continue. Continue reads that you pay 1 gauge, and then you call a size 2 or you call 1 size 2 or less adventurer and 1 size 2 or less dungeon enemy by paying their call costs. Now, this seems like, this would be a bit gauge heavy just to activate if you call such things as Bladewing Phoenix or something along the lines if you played, I don't know, another, thing that costs a gauge, like, call it Tetsuku from a drop or something. But, it wouldn't be so bad because getting back 2 monsters is just, for 1 gauge, just absolutely great. And if you get something, say, like a Tetsuya and a Bladewing Phoenix, 2 gauge is a very minimal thing to do to get 2 cards that can potentially give you double attacks on the field. Huh. And speaking of that, another pro of the deck is the amounts of double attacking in this deck. Now, most decks would have maybe a move theme, maybe penetrate theme, which is not really a thing yet, but there are penetrate in just about every world except Magic. But one thing that's prominent is this deck has lots of double attacking ways to do a lot of damage. You got Bladewing Phoenix, and you got Tetsuya, can pretty much link of an adventure, and then you get one of the adventures in the link attack, double attack. So this can count with your weapon, Glory Seeker. What you'll know is that you can go for a really powerful play with just a Bladewing Phoenix, a Tetsuya, Dance Magician Tetsuya, and a Glory Seeker. Once you've paid the correct a quick cost for Glory Seeker and call cost for Bladewing Phoenix, which is 1 gauge for Bladewing Phoenix, and discard a card for Glory Seeker, then you can go for this kind of play. Say maybe you want to be all safe, you go attack a Blade Wing, restand it, then you're going to link with Tetsuya and your Glory Seeker. Now, there you probably would deal them 2 damage with Blade Wing's first attack, and then you go for 4 with Tetsuya's and Glory Seeker's crit added up, since 1 plus 3 is 4, obvious. So then you get 6 damage in. Then you can use Tetsuya's ability, and then you restand the Glory Seeker, and now 3 crit to your opponent's face, 9. And then Blade Wing Phoenix has double attack, so he still has 1 more attack left, so then go for 2. And say your opponent even buddy called, that means even with 11 life, they would lose that turn. Which is pretty sad to think of, that a deck this can easily do such a thing. But, of course, this deck, once again, has just the things that make a good deck. Every single thing that makes a good deck is in this deck. Because of mission cards, continue. Oh, and let's get on to the other pros of the deck. Orsiclines. Orsiclines on his own is a very powerful size 2. He's 4/2/5, and he's a size 2, no call cost, and pretty much you go, okay, choose an adventure, choose a dungeon enemy, either one from your drop zone, and put them in any order you want at the bottom of your deck. Then basically kosher your way to a gauge 1 and then draw 1 ability. Now, you can only use this once while it's on the field, but yeah, what the heck? It's so damn good, who cares? You get a gauge and a draw, and I'll get on to the importance of that gauge later. But pretty much Orsiclines allows you to get more cards in your hand, which this deck already gets enough of. So you can probably draw into your nullifiers, and then the gauge gets you probably the resources to use one of your nullifiers, such as Pillar Fire or Shalsana. And the last mixed card that's pretty broken is Dragon Wielding Shilavana. Shilavana is absolutely amazing. When you have a dungeon enemy, she gets +2 crit. If you have an adventure, she gets Penetrate. So pretty much allowing you to get a 3-kit Penetrate, even though it's 1,000 power and it's a size 1, so it's easily removable. But this card alone just gets you so much advantage because you can link attack with it. It's because it's an adventure. You can do a lot of damage with it because it's Penetrate and 3 crit if you have the according cards on the field. But it's easy because if you have Glory Seeker, it's an adventurer, so you already fill out that little thing and then condition, and then all you have to do is call it a Blade Wing Phoenix or a size 0, and then bam, you got that already. Now that I mentioned Shilavana, now we get to talk about the Penetrate cards. Now we've got Tsuku, Quenzway, and Shilavana. These cards alone just allow you to go for so much Penetrate damage, your opponent's pretty much not going to have a lot of ways to defend himself. Say they're running into a bit of dilemma, they gotta throw a monster in the center. Well, as long as you have the appropriate card, you can pretty much go for all the damage you want against your opponent's already filled center, which is something really crazy that most decks can't do, and even if they can, it costs them probably a lot more resources than most decks would. But this is pure, this is Dungeon Mix, so they're able to do this with a flick of a finger, and then you just get it on field, and then you're kind of sitting there trying to wonder how you can get out of this situation, which is pretty sad for most decks to deal with. And the last and final pro that I'm finally getting tired of talking about is the immense attack pressure. This deck pressures you to no end. You have almost 0 ways to deal with every single attack that comes from this deck. It's so powerful. Every single hit can do a lot of damage and will do a lot of or put you in a setback against your opponent, because double attackers and penetrates and all these, you can go for damage, you can wipe a board, you can get back your resources. There's so many things that just makes this deck way too good for its time. It's a bit ahead of its time, but it came already, so we have to deal with it now. Hopefully Set 4 gives us the necessary means to put this deck back in its place, and we can have more diversity in this format. But every good deck has its bad flaws. Now, it's pretty similar to both decks' problems when they were separate, pure builds. For once, for the cons, if we finally get to start those, weak defenses. That is very apparent because you can tell, hey, Tetsuya's got pretty low defense, Blade Wing Phoenix's defense is shit, there's no size 3s to defend yourself unless you're playing like Tosa Hound or Meteor Rain. There's not really people who run those as much though, because they're trying to go for a rush deck that can go damage, 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 damage. So pretty much you can actually hit this deck pretty hard just as back if you have a pretty good deck your own. And the deck pretty much has another con known as the terrible, terrible mirror match. Remember all those pros I was talking about? Now imagine the deck going against that with their weak defenses. Yeah, that's pretty bad for them. They can The Dungeon Mix mirror match is so prominent because you have to remember all the things about your deck and then take into account what your opponent might have done to prepare for that. Or even if they didn't prepare for that, you gotta think about what they have in their deck. Even if it's similar to yours, different than yours, you gotta think about what Dungeon Mix does. All the pros and all the cons you have to account for when you're doing that mirror match. And this is why mirror matches usually do take long in any kind of game. And another con of the deck, Ancient World's still a pretty bad match. Now, like I said, this deck has double attackers and penetrate, so it's not too hard to get rid of a freaking Seeger on board. But the problem is, once you start getting to those really annoying things, such as Spartan, when Spartan starts coming out, then the deck can start crumbling because it has to hit a bit of higher numbers, and it can still have, and Seeger being Seeger, Wrath Trigger, and Dragon Outlaw, or Dragon Lucian, or something, Dragon Thunder, Dragon Flame Cascade. These things can help you in these matchups because once you start destroying your field, unless they have ways to get it back, this deck starts crumbling, just like any other deck. Another thing is, the deck's easily removable. Like I said, this deck is just like Pure Adventures. This is primarily around size 1s, and now even size 0s you can throw in. So you are easily able to remove them because of their low stats, of course. Not in such sometimes with the power, but you can definitely deal with their defenses because they are pretty goddamn weak. So you can easily destroy these monsters off the field. So that's a good plus for you if you're trying to beat this deck. The next con of the deck is still nothing is above 5k power, reasonably. Now, unless you're playing something like Thunder Spaltus or Skullgo, Mazu Baja in your deck, then once again, everything is 5k and less. And they don't boost anything because they don't play Dominion Rod or Alerta, of course. So, once again, this deck doesn't hit the magic numbers that everyone else does. But, well, they have Link Attacks. And Link Attack pluses equal... I mean, I don't count the Link Attacks as the pro because Link Attacks are easy to stop. Unless you're Katana World. Then you cry. And the last con of the deck is easily its slight gauge heaviness. Now, this deck is quite gauge heavy. You have Tsuku, you have your other weapons such as the Penetrate Sword, Soma Sword, or what do you ever want to call it for short. The Dragon Slaying Sword, you have your Defeat All Monsters, you've got Blade Wing Phoenix, and you've got, I think that's just about it, other than your nullifiers, so pretty much, it's just got the same problems as Dungeon Enemy, it's a bit gauge heavy. This has Ursa Kleins, which the other builds don't have, so I guess they do have a gauge accelerating card. Maybe 1 gauge at a time, but with the addition of a charge and draw, you pretty much got 2 gauge right off the back, so not bad. And definitely because Ursa Kleins also gives you a draw, so this deck can sometimes deal with it, but with the new cards such as Demonic Break Slash or whatever it's called, then you get to get rid of a gauge from them and then take it back. So Danger World could have a pretty good matchup already. Anyway, my final verdict of the deck is something you're probably going to expect. This is a really, 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 really good deck. Say that 5 times fast. I just did. I'm kidding. But this deck is absolutely probably the best deck right now in Buddy Fight because of so many things it does. It's ahead of its time. It can get back resources. It can do monster revival. It can search cards. There's just so many things that this deck just does that other decks can't do at the moment. But this deck still has its weaknesses, so don't overestimate any player or this deck just because you think it's pretty broken. Which it is, but don't overestimate anything. So I hope you guys liked this video. Subscribe to Team Million Infinity and stick around for more amazing Buddy Fight videos. And definitely comment down below what you want to see in episode 11. And that means no Dungeon World because I've covered it. See you guys later. Yo, yo, yo.